Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the latest CODA webinar. Joining us today, we have two gentlemen from WellDecommissioned to talk about lowering P&A costs and risk with WD Apollo software. So to briefly introduce the two speakers, we're joined today by Marc Nijmeijer and Analyst Chris Berge. We're going to provide an insightful introduction to WellDecommissioned and showcase a demo of the software, how it's used, and give us a little bit of an understanding just of the value that this super tool can bring to industry and to getting our estimating right. So by way of a really quick introduction, Marc is the founder of WellDecommissioned. He's got over 25 years experience as a director and manager in E&P. Before founding WellDecommissioned, he worked in Shell Europe and in Southeast Asia in operating companies and in the corporate centre. His focus has been in upstream business performance improvement and finance and strategy. With WellDecommissioned, his focus is on strategic collaborations and business development, continuing the business growth. Marc holds a Master's in Industrial Engineering and Management and an Executive Master's in Finance and Control. Chris is assisting Marc with the platform, and he's worked with multiple operators and supply chain clients during P&A project planning and evaluation. He's been involved in offshore and onshore P&A plans, including deep water and large platform campaigns. Chris has cleansed and converted several large data sets and records into the WD Apollo software, and has been integrally involved in the development and operation and execution of projects using the software. His extended software includes working with SimOps and daily operations. He has an MSc in Decommissioning from Aberdeen University and a Bachelor's in Systems Engineering and Management from Delft University. So with no further ado, I will hand over to Marc and Chris to deliver the webinar for us.
Francis, thank you very much for your very clear introduction. And we're really very pleased to have CODA hosting us at this webinar. What Chris and myself will do is take you through a bit of a background to WellDecommissioned and digitalization that we've been doing, especially in the decommissioning space. And Chris will, of course, give a demo. So he will do a main part, and in the setting that we're in this call, please ask any question that you have or what you would like to address or bring up. We can factor that in and talk about that, no doubt. So Chris will pull up a short presentation. I won't take too long. Because seeing is believing, and I think looking at the software, it makes it more interesting for you all. If you share your screen.
Yeah, should be coming up.
Great. Are you able to see my screen? I think so. Let me know if not. So what are we after with Apollo software? As Francis mentioned, I founded WellDecommissioned back in 2017, coming from Shell. Many experiences in optimizing the business, projects, and also in decommissioning, actually mainly in Southeast Asia and later also in Europe. And very often the challenge with decommissioning is there is no revenues to be gained, and it becomes much more a cost play than a revenue for chasing first oil. So how can we reduce those costs in a responsible manner, but also keep it safe, please, and hassle-free? That is what many owners are after. Although formally many operators will talk about trying to achieve or wanting to achieve lowest total cost. It is, of course, really about how can we close wells, remove platforms in a sustainable manner, and do that safely, where, of course, the cost needs to be affordable or low. But by no means is it only about low cost, because taking low cost and high risk in this industry I think everybody would agree that that would be a very good thing to do. So that's number one we're after. But also, how can we make the whole preparation of these type of projects a lot more straightforward and a lot faster? And there's a couple of drivers there. One is actually that, especially in the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of people leaving the industry. Lack of engineers, lack of staff in general is a challenge worldwide to almost all the operators, but also in the supply chain. So how can we do more with less, more with data? How can we use systems to support us and focus on what really matters and leave some of the number crunching to tools like the Apollo software? There's also another very important point, because if I can use software to my advantage at a very early stage in a project, I can actually simulate and calculate what my forecasted project should look like and what it should cost. And I can compare scenarios and therefore involve this in decision making. And that is what our software gets used for quite a bit. So if you I'm not sure if you're familiar with the terminology front-end loading, but this is really making front-end loading, which is really, if I define front-end loading, it is at an early stage, years ahead of a final investment decision, getting the plan right so that you have to change very little once you have started building your factory or you're drilling your well or closing your well. And the philosophy is that anything you need to change at a later stage or during execution costs money. It doesn't create any savings. So the savings need to be made at a front-end stage. So front-end loading, really important. And what it allows with this software is to really deepen that piece of work, because we can, with a digital tool, involve a lot more data at that stage. And there's some very good examples where operators have used our software to actually significantly, very significantly reduce the cost of abandonment campaigns. The other philosophy we had with the Apollo software is that so many ways to close a well, so many ways to remove assets from the seabed, for instance. And there's different tools, different rigs, different vessels. And what if we introduce a new rig or a new tool? Then we want to look at that as well and understand that. So this software facilitates also a new technology. All the rig services are embedded, all the tools. And if it's not there yet in our software, it will be added as master data. For example, we did a project, a large study for an Australian operator last year. It was a well P&A project for a couple of fields. And basically, all of the rigs, vessels, tools were in, but a few. And we added these tools with the methods into the software to complete the whole service package to digitally simulate with. Now, more recently, what we have seen is the involvement of data from work done, so to say, offset data. The offset data came in for WellDecommissioned in 2019-20, where one of our clients said, hey, it's great to be planning and look at different rigs and P&A units or different vessels. However, we would like to plan with our own track record, our own data. And this is how we got started with involving data from work done. As of today, we actually have quite a few operator clients that have put in all their data from work done in the system. So there is a large major, which actually we're working for now at the moment to put in the last couple of decades of abandonment work into their software. That is all on their work on the North Sea. About 150 wells, but we also have a few IOCs that have put in their whole track record of work done in the software at a very detailed level of the daily reports. And that data is then used to create plans with. So it actually very nicely closes that loop, which is in the white circle in the middle of this diagram, to actually simulate with data from execution. Right, that about the concepts. A bit about WellDecommissioned. So So we're really after optimizing decommissioning and more recently also energy transition projects. So that is because we focus on well decommissioning, subsea facilities decommissioning, to an extent also on platform decommissioning. And we've gotten requests from the industry and governments as well saying, hey, actually, if we look at decommissioning and reuse, can you help us as well with your software to facilitate energy transition projects? So think about geothermal, that's a big theme, but CCUS, the also CO2 storage also gets more and more attention. So the software is really a web product. Chris will show that to you. That's what we own. We also develop that further continuously. And next to that, WellDecommissioned also provides consulting and assistance next to using the software. So any consulting assignment we did, like the example I gave for the Australian operator last year, it is centric to using the software as a great tool. But also some of our other clients, mainly operators, use the software themselves. And then people like Chris provide support in using them, but they're really taking off themselves with it. So it's a bit of a hybrid mode we can entertain depending on how many people a client has and what they want. WellDecommissioned is independent, and all the work we do and the contracts we have with our clients are on a confidential basis. So we always treat data confidentially. And this is also how the software is set up. It allows, although, the option to share across companies if they want to. We're based in Aberdeen and The Hague, but a great deal of our work obviously is virtually. So this is a bit about how we came to where we are today. Starting up in 2017, developed around the North Sea, developed a SaaS software architecture around 2019, did some project work with a large contractor in the Gulf deepwater, WellDecommissioning. We developed and launched the secure SaaS to the market in the beginning of 2020, at the beginning of COVID. Started off with offset data and with all the DDR and DPR offset data, so the daily drilling reports and project reports. It also brought it into how we actually can align and convert data to a standard taxonomy. And that is one of the main parts of what we do. So it's the backbone, I would say, is not only having a software structure in place, but also how do we get the data right. Started in Asia, 2021. Then at the same time, driven by the UK, together with the Net Zero Technology Center, we've added the subsea infrastructure decommissioning to the software. So to remove pipelines, umbilicals, all kinds of substations up to the mattresses and debris from the seabed. Australia I mentioned, and also a lot of focus in the recent year on new topics like how do we include emissions, how can we share offset data. That is the biggest thing we're working on at the moment, and also developing further new software areas. So what I would like to do is for Chris to show us what our software looks like. And again, if you have a question, just chip in or let Chris know.
Thank you, Mark. Then I will stop sharing the presentation and I will switch over towards the actual software side. There we go. So this is the landing page of the Apollo software. In this case, it's the Apollo environment that I actually use. And there's a lot of information in there. And we're going to focus on a demo project for well P&A in this case. So I'm going to open up the project. And first of all, the software prompts you with some generic information, for instance, about the owners and the shares of the owners in the different assets. Then we are presented with a list of assets that are in this project. Typically, it involves a field, for instance, in offshore environments, but can also be applied onshore. And the assets range from wells to pipelines, as well as subsea installations. And in an offline toolkit, we're also able to manage the facilities and topsides of offshore platforms as well. The data of these assets can be actually uploaded into the system from a range of sources. So sometimes there needs to be some conversion, apparently, but in this case, we're looking at some straightforward data for one of the wells. First off, there's some generic information such as your GPS points, what type of well it actually is, or type of asset. So it's a platform or a subsea basis. What the actually water depth is, and if there's any known issues already into these assets. So there's a list already available within the well-decommissioned environment, but for each project we can actually tune the issues and the related data that we need to capture for it. There's some technical data such as your tubing or completion depths and sizes, as well as the casing. And I'm going to skip through it rather quickly. There will be some additional information such as the perforations, and this should also be readily available in the industry, for instance, from a well diagram before you actually start P&Aing. And in the end, some of the data is more to do with the environment. So where are the natural barriers and which zones do you actually need to isolate? And all of this data can be uploaded and shared into the software. Then I'm going to switch from actually the asset data, so capturing all of that already known asset data, towards project planning. So how do we actually set up a campaign, for instance, within the software for all of those assets that we've already identified? I'm going to share a strategy or a checkup in this case. And I'm going to keep focusing on a well, but keep in mind this can also be applied to subsea pipelines or topsides and facilities. And in this case, we're looking at setting up a campaign for a couple of wells for a checkup, including NPT waiting on weather, for a couple of phases. And we can specify the NPT and waiting on weather based on historical data for each of the phases, and for instance, as well for each of the units applied. This software actually has quite a long list already of units available within WD Apollo software. So there's some hydraulic workover units, some semi-submersibles, typical jackups, even with long legs, so quite suitable for Australia environments as well. And for each of the projects, we actually tune some of these rigs to the solutions of to the challenges of the operator. And we select one of these rigs for this strategy. And what the software actually does, it actually pulls in the KPIs of that specific rig, its specific moving times, for instance, and applies everything going forward into all of the work sequences that we're going to create for a well in this case. If I open up one of those programs for the well, initially I'm being prompted with the high-level steps for safely P&Aing this well, such as cutting the tubing, pulling the tubing, running a CBL, and setting your actual barriers. And for each of these high-level steps, we need to put in the depths of, for instance, your barriers, but also the casing size that you're actually working in. And the software will use this data to automatically set up a working plan. And we can actually combine that with applying probabilities towards each of the options, for instance, if you have contingency cases. Now, in the next step, the software will actually pull in all of these big level steps and automatically generate a detailed work plan based on your asset data, your rig selected, and all of the high level steps that you've just seen. And these steps are automatically generated, but still provide the engineer with the option to put in an alternative solution, or for instance, tweak the numbers a bit, so that if there's already some information known up front about a specific activity, the engineer can always overrule or adjust, for instance, the probabilities. And you will see that for each of these detailed steps, the software actually calculates a P50 number. Currently, that's calculated from the Apollo master database, but we can automatically pull in historical data from your own for historical performances, as well as a benchmark data set as well. The numbers currently are excluding empty and waiting on weather, but I'll quickly jump towards the output, and you will get prompted with a couple of overviews, for instance, on phase levels, action levels, including and excluding empty, waiting on weather, as well as applying learning efficiencies that we can also capture from historical data once again. So the power actually is in quickly being able to change perspective, as Marc already said, that we can compare strategies, for instance, comparing a rig, but also comparing technologies in scenario A versus B, where B can be new technology, for instance. And what the software actually will do is automatically pull in the rig APIs, once again, the new technology, the historical data where it is available, and create these plans almost fully automatically. And for each of the sub activities that you saw in the detailed work plan, the software will create a allocated cost plan as well. So it already knows which services are involved in which activities, and quickly turn that around to a fully detailed cost plan at start of the project already. So once you start combining strategies or start to look at strategies, these cost output will already be available to support your decision making. That's relatively detailed already, but it's for one asset. Now I'm going to quickly show you how we can actually combine these projects as well. So I'm going to pull up one of the campaign simulations for this project, where we string them together, and we're going to look at a couple of different options to actually treat this project. So at this moment, we're looking at doing the asset subsequently. So first we're going to decommission well number 1, and we're going to move to well number 2. And again, this is created automatically within the software. We can quickly change that around and doing the project completely in phases. So now we're actually looking at phase 1, and we're going to switch from phase 1, well 1 to well 2, well 3, and therefore there will be some time consequences to it, but also some cost efficiencies to actually being able to batch your wells. All of this data is available at detailed level once more. So for instance, here we can see cutting the tubing, and we can actually already see at which time it's allocated to start, and any data that we need to keep in mind to perform this activity. All of this is actually supported by an analytical suite within the software, where the user can upload his historical data, and it will be translated to the standard taxonomy of the well-decommissioned environment, Apollo environment, so that we are able to actually compare one operator to the other and use that data going forward in planning. So in this case, we're prompted with quite some generic data, for instance, over the years and your NPT and waiting on weather specifications that you can see right here. But we can very easily change that around in the software and, for instance, look at the rig selected, which rigs were actually used over the years for which assets, and the software will automatically create the graphs that are required for your comparison. It's all set up dynamically, so the software user, it being a consultant on its own for a specific object, or the operator to actually compare projects, or myself as an analyst to actually support operators. It's all set up in such a way that the user can actually see all of the data behind it visually. Having said so, the actual DDRs are also available directly within the software, where the original allocated text, but also the translated taxonomy, are made visible towards the different clients. This is still relatively high level data, but if we move towards a more detailed level of the data, we can actually compare actions or activities even for each of the data points that are actually in there. So this is an example of cutting the completion type of an action, which we saw in the work sequence as well. There are 120 references. We can actually see quite a bit of a learning curve in the right bottom as well as being able to see which of the assets and fields are actually allocated towards it. On the left bottom, we are prompted with a P10, P50, and P90 estimated timing for this specific action. So that's mid-level activity, I would say. And this software still allows the user to really dive in to what actually makes up these timings. So we can select, for instance, only the last couple of years, select specific fields that we want to look at or specific operators. But we can also dissect it and see where difference actually come from. And I'm going to show you one example. Keep in mind, this is a demo data set and not actual data that you're looking at, where we can split all of the data into companies. And you will see the S-curves change on the left bottom. And we can see that, for instance, company A and B have a relatively quick performance compared to company C. And that data we actually bring forward into planning. This is on an action level, but we can also do that on the very detailed level. So this data can automatically be supplied in your own data frame within the WellDecommissioned Apollo software and support your future plans as well.
Yeah, and I think Chris, what Chris is showing is a breakdown by company, but it can also be a breakdown by, let's say, location type or what type of well, what type of operation. So the slicing and dicing in that sense through the data can be endless, and that is because the data sets are the most granular from what was ever recorded, let's say, in the industry. So it really allows you to look at, okay, if I do a specific project, let's say on a platform with, small platforms with just a few wells, or large platforms with a lot of wells, the whole time I take to conduct the project may be very different. So I can now slice and dice into the data in such a way that I can look at how many wells do I have on site, and therefore where should my P50 be, so to say, and where my P90, and use that in the planning. So I can be a lot more applicable and straightforward in making a plan. And that is something where the feedback has been really very positive. We have 50% of our clients are operators, the other 50 are supply chain, but they really like to do that because for operators, the estimates get more applicable and accurate. But for contractors, their tools and methods using the software get also more appreciated, so to say, on why things should be taking longer or can be faster compared to other methods. So the whole plans become a lot more credible using this data. So it's becoming a data-driven planning game. Right. So we have, so from Chris, thank you. I think this is actually giving a good overview. We have some a cost facility as well, but actually 90% of the focus of our customers is on understanding the durations and how long things took. Because obviously, if we know how long it took and we know let's say the services and the equipment involved, then calculating the total cost is ultimately a P times the Q calculation. So that's relatively easy. The focus, especially for the wells, is in the total cost we see for subsea infrastructure decommissioning. That is a slightly different approach, but also to get to the cost, you need to know how long things take and for what type of circumstances your assets are in, or what seabed they are, etc., and therefore how long an operation can be taking. So Chris was just showing a wells example, but he could have shown a subsea infrastructure decommissioning example as well. If I put back the slides on the screen sharing, I think that's think you can see my screen now. So what is it really about is that Chris has shown you a software, but what's important is that it is not just the software. So we have a user process on the left with putting in wells or pipelines, setting actions to plug and abandon or to clean, leave in situ or remove assets with different strategies and generating outputs and reviewing and updating them. That becomes an iterative process. I think what's important is that this software can be used across the stage gate. So we've just closed out an assess level study, a very early study for an operator. Concept studies, feed studies get done, but also preparation of execution and a lot of review of work done. And it doesn't really matter where you start, because let's say through the circle of the different stage gates, you will be able to build on data that you have entered into the system. And that is because it is very consistent with the software, and planning is always very data driven. And that is where, again, we put a lot of effort to make sure that the data from our clients is aligned with the taxonomy. We started with operators to convert their data, but we now have some contractors coming to us, drilling hydraulic workover unit contractors and well service company that are saying, hey, we also have a lot of daily reports. Can you help us as well to do the same well decommissioned and make our plans? That doesn't all get blurred because it's treated confidentially across, but we see for operators that they are very keen to actually share across their community with contractors that may be a bit more complex across contractors with competitions. But I can see contractors that want to share what they have done with operators, especially if they're very confident on the quality of their services, which I hopefully they rightly should be. So yeah, the software is actually a continuous evolution we're working on, because as we move into this space, the software is relatively stable, but you can do a lot more with the data. So machine learning and AI play a big role in how we cleanse and harmonize the data with the taxonomy, but also understanding characteristics of assets and using them in creating more accurate plans. So yeah, this is an example, for instance, on how we've done a project. We've done a couple of these similar projects in the past couple of years. But this was actually an oil company that wanted to decommission a batch of subsea wells. So they had a couple of challenges. One is that there were quite a few options to look at, different rigs, vessels to be involved, quite a few wells, also quite a lot of complexity with many options. And they didn't have a lot of people involved. They had some people, but it was not a round team. And yeah, I think they had a lot of very experienced people with, call it a bit of my age, and just about 50 plus or so around that age, but not a lot of data savvy engineers like Chris. So we actually formed a team with them. It was about 5 of their people, 6 of us. We had a few experts to make it a rounded team, and a couple of our analysts to actually get all the data in the software from their wells and actually do simulations. So we actually got their scope of work covered in Apollo. We actually looked at not only the rigs we already had in Apollo, because most of it we had in, but we also calibrated with the operator experience with some of these rigs. So we fine-tuned and confirmed the KPIs of the rigs. We used the operator day rates and contract basis to set the rates. The operator got input from talking to the contractors, and we fully costed around 6 strategies that would be the logical strategies that they could conduct the work with. We had sensitivities calculated with the software, got to all the well engineering work using the software and the folks in the team, both from the operator and from our own team. And we then stress tested the winning strategy. And the feedback from the operator, this was a concept select stage, was this is the first time we actually achieved a realistic full costing at such an early stage. And because it was a pre-standard study, it allowed them to actually change their strategy. So they had a more, call it a conventional strategy, how to close the wells, and they were very confident that they were going to do that. But actually, because we actually made all the projects and the options very transparent and we de-risk them together with them, it just become very visible and logical to them that there's other ways of doing as well. So they changed the strategy pre-tender and they carved out 30% of the total project cost, which was a huge saving. It also helped them with the software to retain quantified plans with all the durations as a baseline, including the fully costing. So it is actually helping them to have a good basis to move on, to retain data. And you may recall that from if you have worked in this type of departments and in the industry before, that a lot of spreadsheets typically used in this type of work gets lost or outdated, and then when new people or contractors come in, work is going to be redone. So using the software and using a license for it as an operator allows them to retain that work and even reuse for new wells or new project scope. A similar thing, this was a recent decommissioning subsea study where we focused on removing everything from the seabed. So the platforms and the jackets, so to say, were there, not covered, but everything on the seabed was entered into the software, and scenarios were planned to actually reduce, to look at taking out all these assets, and that was used for the liability estimates that the operator was making. It's a baseline study that they've done to confirm their estimates, and it gave them a lot of insights by breaking down into small steps, like Chris was showing, to remove the assets, where the scope for improvement is. So currently we're looking at a follow-up from that study to actually look at alternative methods and using the learnings from the baseline study for let's say a more follow-up study, which should get towards having software-driven estimations which are transparent and then understood by the engineers of the operator to actually understand how big the gap is. And this is driven by several operators in Europe that have learned that actually subsea decommissioning is an area hardly untouched. Some has happened, but not a great lot. But in some of the recent work, we've seen quite a few project overruns, 30–40% in the industry, where there is discussion about, did we get it right in the past? And especially in subsea, a lot of estimates have been made with rules of thumb. And I think using this software, that is going to change, because you can actually simulate projects and use feedback and several iterations to become a lot more realistic. And that is including factoring in all the weather aspects for such operation, to make sure that plans become closer to how long it's actually taken. And the big thing in this discussion is also to bring in offset data again, just like what Chris was showing on the dashboard with the graphs. The same thing we have already to a smaller extent for subsea, but the discussion is now with several parties in the industry to do the same effort to create a shared offset data set. Also because many operators don't have a lot of good and statistically relevant offset data, but combining some of these obviously makes it a wider set, which is more useful. Good. So this is some examples. And I would say there's a lot of repetitiveness in what we do. So we do these projects all around the world, I would say. And we think this is also a very good method to apply in Australia. We've seen that from work done in Australia last year, that a lot of the methods and a lot of the applicability to assets is really the same for the North Sea. You just need to be aware where it is different and apply different assumptions for estimates, different premises. But obviously, since the software is very granular, that is easy to factor in. So benchmarking becomes a true apple-to-apple benchmark there. Right, that's where I would like to leave it from our contribution for today. So I'd like to hand over back to Francis or Roel for any questions you may have.
Excellent. Thank you so much, gents. That was really interesting. Really interesting walk through the software. We've had a question come in through the chat, so I'll start with that one. I have a couple of my own, but I'll take the one from the chat as the first one up. So this was Diogo, who's asking, does the software also help with progress monitoring of pipeline cleaning, disconnection, recovery, wells P&A, or is it primarily aimed at the prediction side of things? So I guess can you keep it going for a progress tracking as well?
Yeah, so we have that development ongoing. So there is a few things. For instance, what we do quite frequently is that, especially for plug and abandon, we see that every well done gets added to the software. And we've discussed with clients, operators, but the same with contractors. Oh, can we actually use daily reporting and daily tracking, and it could be online. So for the software, that is actually not a problem. It is creating a software interface between systems, or it could be including a reporting facility in the software. We haven't done it yet, but I think also for subsea, it would be a really good thing to do. I think at the moment, what I see is that we are talking to a few of our operator clients on subsea, and they have, they are struggling a bit, I would say, with getting their reportings together. And that's because we have multiple contractors working on the projects, and these contractors also have different reports, and that needs to be aggregated. So it's almost, where do you start in the chain? And I think where the feedback we also had, especially for subsea, there were a few operators in decommissioning that said, the decommissioning team said, oh, we should actually use this software for IRM, so for the maintenance and the cleaning and the inspection of subsea pipelines and installations as well. And that is true. For you can work over wells with the software too. We're even working in development to drill wells with the software. I think, and this is what I mean with the continuous evolution, as data and software enables us to create more alignment of projects and projects information, those developments will happen, and that can be either we expand our software or we create interfaces, and that is a preference that I have, because we cannot cover everything. But the things that are very common are using reporting interfaces or having some extra facility in our software, but also to connect with digital twins, for instance, where digital twins are having a lot of data often about an asset, calculations on how assets work, and actually look at, if I look at the input of our software, that is actually, a lot of that is getting inputted into our software now. We import asset registers from operators, for instance, but we also have a lot of manual TAs. But actually, if you can have data connected from the digital twin into the software, or having a planning next to knowing the digital twin, that is also a very useful interface.
So lots of developments. It sounds like you've got a very long list, presumably on the wall we're not seeing in your office, with a big whiteboard with lots of ideas written on them. Then, Marc,
for instance, the wall is too small.
Fair enough. Very good. So a couple of questions I've got for you. One around costs. So how do you keep your costs current, or do you work on a project by project basis where the company will come along and say, here's the spread costs, here's the equipment costs?
Yeah, there is different sources for costs. So the software is set up in such a way that every user, organization, or operator or contractor has its own confidential box, and they can input or import contracts and premises rates into the software. WellDecommissioned also has a master data set of costs that gets updated frequently, and we use that for projects. But yeah, I would say so that is how we do it. So ultimately, cost is first used for an indication, but especially, of course, when it needs to be a valid cost, for instance, for a tender comparison or for a preparation of a tender for a contractor, then any company would want to use its own assumptions for cost, and they can have it applied into the software. And the good thing is that no one else can see it but their users, the output.
Very good, very interesting. Another question for you. Sorry, I'm being asked something here by my colleague. Oh, okay, right. Sorry, I've got another question from my side, and then I'll get to the prompt I've just had as well. How about campaigning? Is there a way that, say, two operators who are looking at running a campaign together, is there a way that you could bridge across between two different estimates that you would have in there to align things in that? Is that something that you've done, or you would think you would do?
Yeah, we've discussed this. We haven't done this yet. So what happens a lot is data sharing from work done. So we now actually have a major and two IOCs who've agreed to actually share data from work done. And there's now a couple of more operators that said, hey, that's good. We also would like to join. So it's spreading out, and it's not just Europe. It started from Europe, but this is operators that involve their global data sets. Planning together is actually easy in the software. So yes, we can set that up in several ways. So we just need to be mindful that, especially in terms of the cost, that needs to adhere in terms of the total governance of such a project, as well as competition law and all that. But we've seen some of these campaigns in Europe as well, and they do happen. So it's actually a very useful tool, and because the taxonomy is a consistent industry language with consistent definitions, it is meant to actually run joint industry projects, because you get plans which are basically on the same page, and I use my spreadsheet, you use mine, but you use yours, mine, and how do we compare this? And it's not only compare, we can both talk about having running whole in a spreadsheet for a while, but a lot gets more fundamental, what definitions we use. So also with our software, that's where it never stops. It touches on, okay, how do we define NPT? How do we report that? Waiting on weather is maybe not such a big thing, but there is still, although there is legal requirements, different companies, different ways of defining and recording, and because we have this alignment and granularity in the software, it becomes visible. So we have some discussions, for instance, in the UK happening now between operators saying, hey, actually, we should talk about some of these definitions because, it becomes relevant to get it aligned. Yeah. And I'm really happy about that. If you have a few operators that are interested in working together for a campaign, then call me.
It's certainly something that we hear a lot of conversations about down here in Australia, but it's a mighty challenging thing just to try and get things to align, just the stars to align, if you like, around the work that needs to be done and the timings and budgets and everything else for different operators. But it felt like a question that I needed to get out there. So we have a question here in the Q&A from Hank. Could you please confirm that the software comes with anonymized well P&A performance data for different rig types? And also, can performance data for historical well workover activities be input and used for estimating well P&A? How can a reviewer understand what source data has been used for estimates, default or project specific? So there's multiple questions in that one, but some crackers. So yes, there you go, gents.
Yeah, so good questions. And I'll try to answer that as good as I can. But so maybe to start with the rigs in there and performances are based on KPIs. And because the plans are calculated in a step-by-step manner, it becomes actually relatively, it becomes transparent and relatively straightforward to actually understand what happens. The rigs are calibrated in the software. So that means that if WellDecommissioned has involvement from rigs or comparable rigs, that data that has been recorded is used to update KPIs. And that is a very strong method to become a lot more credible than making estimates on how fast we can run in hole, to say it in a popular manner. The offset data, so to say, at the moment is accessible to, let's say, the company that owns that data. So we now have data sharing coming up. So what we cannot do is publish that to everybody. We need to have consent from parties in the industry. We're not at that point as of yet. I think this is not so much up to WellDecommissioned, but also to understand how far, especially the owners of the data, or it could be operators, or it could be contractors as well, are willing to go in sharing data for the greater good, because there is for the society a lot of value in having that data set wider available. But of course, mainly the operators will need to be willing to do so. I think they will be in a couple of years down the road. It is a bit of a letting go process. But what we see is that if, for instance, there is a contractor that wants to use this data in a project, we can, and that we have done already, we can get operator consent to providing data and work with that data. So we had a well engineering company doing a study for an operator, and they got data access from the operator through our software. So that I would expect to happen a lot more. The same with well services companies to gain access. But the default is that the data is always confidential. So if a contractor has put in a tool on a confidential basis, or if a operator has put in the data on a confidential basis from work done, for instance, then that does not get shared unless they want us to share it.
Very good. Excellent. Thank you. Another question, this one from Marc. What information exchange standards, if any, are used when importing data into your software? And then the follow-up question to that, is the platform open for extensibility? I'll leave that to someone who knows what that means in the software space. So maybe for you, Chris.
Yeah, maybe Chris, this is one for you to comment on.
Well, one of the ways that we've actually set up the software is, from our perspective, we started out with doing a lot of consultancy and actually importing every challenge that we found of understanding the issues that the operators were facing, and actually putting it in the software as soon as possible, so that a new user can actually run these issues themselves and simulate all of the scenarios that are coming with it. So we are a relatively small company, and we have a separate IT developer, and therefore extensibility ranging from new functionalities or new ways to actually import data. These changes they can be quite quick, actually, because we are relatively small in that space. So anything that the operator needs for a specific case, we are we can install it relatively quickly, so to say.
Yeah, a lot of data is in what we import today is in the CSV or from an Excel file type of data sets. It's a bit more sometimes it's a bit more complicated than that. But that would be the format. So we are looking at discussing with several software companies on potentials for API interfaces between systems. I guess where it takes us that we need to have a beneficiary that wants this for both of the software companies, like ourselves and the other one as well, involved. Yeah, there needs to be an operator or a contractor that wants this system and is paying. And it's not huge, but that's typically how we go. And the APIs are, yeah, I would say standard industry APIs for software.
And for instance, if the APIs are in place, we should be able to relatively quickly again do progress reporting as well in the software, as the data is coming in live at that point.
Yeah. Very good. Well, look, I think we're out of time. We're out of questions. This has been absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Thank you, everybody, for logging on and following along with the presentation and with the Q&A. I'm sure if you've got any questions, Marc and Chris would be more than happy to deal with you or respond to you directly. But look, thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day wherever you may be. And we're back in a couple of days' time with another webinar on a completely different topic, using satellites for decommissioning this time around. So yeah, look, have a great day, everybody, and we'll catch up soon. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.